now and then in Medic, what we try to do, because we are a quality improvement collaborative, is to pull out some quality improvement tools to be able to apply to the work that we do. And I think that it's helpful when you're working at a team, particularly a team that maybe, you know, you don't get to see every day, except for when you come to collaborative meetings. We're working somewhat independent review, so everybody gets the same visualization of what's happening to kind of really outline a process and figure out what's working, what's not. So we're going to introduce the tool of the process map, a more detailed process map on what we call swim lanes. This may be second nature to a lot of people in this room, but it may be somewhat new to some people too. So we thought we would just kind of pull it out to have at your ready when you go back to your institution to try to begin to talk about, like, hey, what are we going to do? But the goal of this is to try to map out a process. We'll use the sample, or I should say an example of the Narcan distribution process. But if you are one of the sites that has already done this a million times and are well worn, you can apply it to either improving that process as it currently exists, or you can apply it to a different measure. Talking in children's hospitals, like time to steroids, things like that. So you can use this particular process. But anyway, we will work through an example of the Narcan distribution program just to kind of outline how this works. So just to show hands, how many have ever seen a swim lane document process map before? Just okay. So what's a process map and what are swim lanes? What are these terms? So a process map is basically, I have to go to school. And so you're gonna, I have to get up, I have to get out of bed, eat breakfast, catch bus, go to school. There's steps in a process that you have to do to get from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. So this is a map that just sort of outlines that. And the swim lanes are part of the stakeholders that are involved in that process who might touch that process or have some role. In our EDs, they're all complex areas, right, where we have a lot of team members doing different jobs. And so for your particular process, it's thinking about and giving some critical thought to who might need to be involved in such a process. So we've heard about a couple of those things with the pharmacist and the nursing and the physician, and there might be peer support people, there might be social work, there might be other people. So we're going to kind of identify swim lanes, starting with what personnel might be involved and what parts of that process that they touch. And then they're especially useful for kind of looking at the whole thing, okay? So we're going to start with this blank map that you have right in front of you, okay? And just what we're going to ask you to do is to work as a team, and we'll begin with me sort of walking through this example right now. So I think a good way to start with this is to first map out, or at least think about the different stakeholders who may be involved in this process. And I understand if you're a site that's just beginning, you may not know exactly all of the people. You have an idea, so it's probably better to be inclusive of the stakeholders who you think might have to be involved, given what you know about your AD. So the vertical lines are really like the major job roles. And then as you work across the horizontal lines, you're going to map out what I would call the big buckets of your process. And in this case, we're going to say, hey, you have to identify the people who might be eligible to get one of these kits, and then we have to kind of narrow it down to target those people who should get the kits, and then we have to give them the kits. Somehow get who's going to do that, and then we have to educate them on what's in the kit, and then we want to mitigate risk. So maybe that's part of like getting them to follow up. Okay, so those are the major vertical and horizontal lines, and then it gets a little fancier. And I just want to stop right here and just say we're at tonight. Or I should say this afternoon, we're not trying to get you to do everything perfectly. We really want to focus on the process and who's involved and what are the details of their roles. So I like to always think about things as where is our starting point to define that. Okay, the patient comes to the emergency department and has a complaint. So we want to identify those people who are coming with maybe an eligible reason to maybe get a Narcan kit in this case, as an example. And then ultimately, we hope they will be discharged from the EDs in some way. So that's the beginning and end of our process. So the beginning and end of processes are typically circles, right? So on our map. So then there's stuff that happens to the patient that involves all these stakeholders you had on the vertical line. So the stuff is what we call, these are the decision nodes. So those are typically, diamond-shaped objects on a process map. And again, don't worry if you got you have stickies on your tables, and you can probably, don't exactly have to be diamonds, but just so you know what the thought process here. And if you notice, some of these diamonds cross different lanes, they cross different horizontal lines. And that's just to suggest that maybe some of the different people have a hand in that one particular process. So, for example, in the first column, you say identify, the patient arrives and somebody is trying to, understand whether this person might actually be eligible or have some eligibility to get a kit. And so that might involve the provider, it might involve nursing, it might involve social work, your whole triage program, maybe your initial provider, something like that. So the decision nodes are important. And then you can imagine, there's a lot to these diamonds. It's not just like, one little thing in there. There may be some other things too, but we'll get to that in a second. But in essence, the deliveries, the squares are interim events. So something happens. The dispense, the medicine has to be dispensed and it's actually given to the patient. Needs to get education and it's actually delivered to the patient. So those are squares. But then, let me go one other point here. Colors. Orange is basically the patient's path, and then the blue colors are the other job responsibilities. Again, you don't have to memorize all the colors, okay, or exactly what's a square, what's a circle. What we want to get you down is to what are the big chunks of the work, who has a hand in doing it, and what are the details around those pockets of work, the decision nodes, okay? So this is where I was getting to. I apologize, I get a little ahead of myself, but the decision nodes are really, this is where you're going to do some more detailed work. So in terms of, like, for example, that first column, geez, if we're screening this patient, what's involved in that? How are we going to screen this? Someone raised a question, I think, to Beth about like BPAs, and another person said, well, maybe someone has a peer coach that pre-screen this and sign to numbers. Maybe there's some different ways that we have to think about of how we're going to capture patients reliably or to give them the best chance of getting the stuff they need. So, or ordering, as we all know, ordering is complex work. It might involve, some tech people. It might involve, maybe a subject matter expert or a quality person in your ED, might involve your clinical champion or, your quality service chief, for example. So there's a lot of people that touch that, or even a C-suite, like, we're doing an EHR upgrade and where does this fit? So this is the essence of the process chart when we're done with it. And this is what we're going to try to do for your process using the example of the Narcan distribution. So just to show of hands, how many have been doing the Narcan delivery kits for a couple of years now? Okay, so there's a couple of you. So in your case, what we want these charts to reflect is current state, but in your case, because you're already seniors doing this work, is you may want to optimize one portion of your process. Maybe the delivery process could be your start and end point or something like that where you want to improve. Or you can use a different quality measure within Medic to try to optimize this work. So when you go home from here, you have something that you can begin to apply to the work of Medic. For the people that have never done it before, this is where we want you to try to outline a map of current state of work as you know it or you think about it today. And part of the thinking behind that, and I know you won't know all the answers, for example, all the decision nodes and things like that, but to try to map out your questions, this is what I think needs to happen, this is who I may need to talk to double check that, so that when you leave here, you have a pretty good idea and can modify or refine once you get to where you're going. Clear? And then the children's hospitals I mentioned before, maybe what we can do is today work on your time to steroids. And because there's always pain points in every single process. So that's the other point of taking these back home is like, what are we going to do about the pain points that aren't working for us or that we suspect will be the barrier to us to be successful in getting this off the ground?